caused by a financial crisis, but then ended up leading to an economic downturn. Any underlying factors that are similar to that? And could you expound on those feelings a little bit for us?
Yeah, I think obviously this is an extraordinary situation. If somebody had asked me what I thought 2020 was going to bring, pandemic in an election year would not have been on my top 100 list. So, I think we were already anticipating some possible fluctuations in the market, primarily election. Certainly, I think COVID, has sent 9/11 like shockwave to, I think, our communities and the market. Like 9/11, it's really, I think, threatened our sense of security. It's threatened the sense of security in the markets as well, as is noted in some of the statistics that they mentioned. But like 9/11 and unlike the Great Recession, I think that we'll start to see some adjustments in the market that allow for some form of recovery. Not to say that there's not going to be challenges ahead. Likely over the next, 90 days to 120 days, we're going to start to see significant distress in some portions of the market. We've already seen within the retail segment, significant issues and probably issues that were already there, just being brought to the forefront. In the hospitality industry, obviously significantly affected, and almost in the same way the airlines were in 9/11. I remember when 9/11 happened, I thought nobody would ever get on an airplane again. That was the flight industry was done. And by 2018, the airline industries were more robust than they'd ever been in their history. So it's likely that things will change, and we're very adaptable. Humans are very adaptable as a species, and we're likely going to change how we do business and do things. But I think certainly that is what that's what we saw coming out of 9/11 versus the Great Recession. I think recession through 2007 through 2009. Most of us spent Fridays, or at least I spent Fridays with a bottle of tequila, waiting for notification that the FDIC was stepping in to take over a bank, and hopefully that bank wasn't a lender on one of our projects. So that's not happening right now, which is very unlike the Great Recession. So I think there's more similarities to 9/11 than the Great Recession, with the caveat that over the next 90 to 120 days, we are going to see some distress. There's likely to be some workouts, and I think those market fundamentals are something that we can discuss a little more about.
Great. Brett, there's obviously a lot of talk about lessons that we can apply from past downturns to each downturn, even though each downturn is a little bit different. What lessons have you learned in the past downturns that you've been through that you are, looking at today and applying?
Well, this cycle, or this pandemic virus it's a little different than the past cycles. And our company's been around since 1948, so we've been through a number of cycles. Personally, this is my fourth one. But this is different than even our CEO walks around and says, I've never seen like it. And mostly because it happened so suddenly. It was such an immediate hit. And to see the markets react, obviously the stock market's one reaction, but the areas that are really impacting us right now are the rent and making sure our tenants stay current. And so we're dealing with this, in effect, it's a government action, which is in effect a form of taking of personal property and private businesses. But one of the notes that I had in talking about this is, we're dealing with areas that we've never dealt with in the default side of our leases, and how we handle that. Do we work out with the tenants? Do we default them? Do we go through unlawful detainer action and statutory 3-day notices and recover the property? So we're just dealing with a whole basket of things that we've never seen in the past. So that is one. And And going forward, Ben, I would say that for the young people on the phone, be patient through these cycles. And Todd said it very well. I thought we'd never fly on a plane again. These cycles, they come and they go. We will get through them. This is America, and it's one of the great, strongest countries in the world. So I think I answered your question there, right? Yeah.
You did. Thank you, Brett. Steve, a similar question along those lines. You've been through a number of cycles yourself. You've been some in your history as with Kilroy and now with Cysterra. How are you seeing the lessons learned from past cycles being applied this time around?
Well, you know, each recession is different, and as Brett just mentioned, this is, you know, a self-inflicted, you know, lockdown or shutdown of the economy. Never happened before. You know, it is a sudden jolt, as Todd mentioned. But, you know, when you look at recessions, generally there is some kind of segue, you know, in economic cycles from, you know, healthy economic conditions to, you know, liquidity, you know, illiquidity is which has been the catalyst for most recessions or slowdowns. The exception being, you know, 9/11. But you know, that being said, I mean, the one consistent, well, a couple things is with each recession comes opportunity. You have dislocation, you have disruption, you have changes, and I think that one of the key things throughout my career is, you know, I've always been, you know, a great advocate of change, and, you know, there's always a better way of doing things, and I think that this opportunity, while it's, you know, stressful, it's traumatic, and it's different, it's basically, we all have to be extremely nimble. We have to be looking forward and saying, you know, and trying to anticipate, you know, what's going to happen, whether it's, you know, what sector. It could be hospitality, it could be industrial, it could be office, but there's going to be changes throughout each and every, you know, sector and property type. So, and with that, with those changes are going to come opportunities. So you know, quite honestly, I'm probably more optimistic now about the opportunity to create value, identifying opportunities to where, you know, Cysterra and our investors, you know, we can, you know, really create some exceptional, you know, outcomes. And I also think that, you know, the other part of this, in part of the success is what we do for our communities. I mean, as part of our, you know, investment strategies, there has to be, since people are a primary component of everything that we do, whether it's, again, hospitality, office, retail, you name it, it's all about people. And so I think as developers and stewards of real estate, you know, we really have to, you know, do a much better job at creating solutions that really benefit all stakeholders. You know, not only us as developers or the investors, the lenders, the contractors, but it's the community stakeholders. It's who our neighbors are, it's who our customers are, and so there really has to be, you know, I think a stronger area of focus to put in that on a go-forward basis.
Great, thank you, Steve. Brett, piggybacking off a little bit of what Steve just mentioned, you had mentioned earlier about this has been such a sudden jolt to the market. It was such a hard stop, unlike other recessions that do have a bit of a run up when you look back and your hindsight's a little bit clearer. What has been that specific impact on some of the projects that you're working on? You mentioned you're going into leases and looking at clauses you probably thought you never would have had to look at, but you're now looking at those. And Steve mentioned that we need to take a broader stakeholder view of commercial real estate. So how are you working through some of the specifics of this downturn right now?
Yeah. So Ben, it's an interesting time in that when you go into a space you've never been in before, you navigate as you go through the process. But what we're finding, if you look at our situation, we have a number of tenants that have decided not to pay rent. And some of these are publicly traded U.S. corporate entities right down to mom and pop businesses. So what's happening is we still have to get up on the first of every month and we have to pay our lenders. And some of our tenants have decided not to pay rent. So the question is, are they dipping into their pocket to pull capital out to pay rent, or are they asking Majestic to dip into their pocket to pay their lender? In effect, it's pushing us into a space where we're asked to be a bank, and we're not a bank. We don't have the upside of that business ownership. We don't have the upside in that increase in stock value when those markets recover and these businesses do well. So we've taken the position that we have to follow the guidelines of the lease. We've got fiduciaries for ourselves as well as our partners, and we're not going to be put in the position of being a bank. We want to work with our tenants. We want to be flexible. We want to make the situation as best we can, but we're just not a lender. So that's been, and I'm learning more, guys, about lease defaults and provisions. And I'll tell you, I will rewrite most of our leases going forward very different than if we've got them in our file cabinets. I'll tell you that. So anyway, Ben, I'm done.
That's great. Thank you, Brett. Steve, same question for you.
I think gone are the days of the short form lease. As Brett was touching on it, I mean, there's going to be new clauses upon new clauses, and not only in just leases. I mean, it's going to affect every contract that is part of a development or investment opportunities. I mean, from equity partners to your debt holders to general contractors. I mean, it's going to you will see new language. You'll spend more time, more money with attorneys and other parties negotiating all these documents because we now have this particular situation, and and from this situation there'll be other kind of worst case scenarios that'll be built into these documents. So it's I think it's it's incumbent upon landlords to be proactive in developing the language, the legal language with their legal counsel to protect their interests, to protect, as Brett said, you don't want to be the bank, but unfortunately, a lot of retail landlords are the bank, because they're faced with, gee, do we want the hope of having a tenant, on the backside of this, or do we want vacancy and trying to go out and find and delaying any sort of income, so and operating expense, et cetera. So it's everyone's situation's different, but it's trust me, the attorneys will, not that they needed a full employment act, but this just added to it, and it's just gonna it's gonna make things a little bit more difficult as you negotiate various legal documents related to what we do in commercial real estate.
Thank you. Todd, you obviously have a deep focus on the hospitality industry, and that's one that's taken a pretty big hit. Are there any projects that you're working on right now that you've thought about changing how you're going to design them or build them, or have they been severely impacted because you're not sure what the industry is going to look like once this is all over?
Yeah, a good question. I think we're active right now in 3 or 4 big hotel projects across the country, South Carolina, in Los Angeles, and in San Diego, and all those projects are moving forward, and 3 of which are close to completion. We haven't actually changed the design. I think with hospitality in the same way with office, I don't think when we come out of this, I think we're going to see some changes. But I think one thing that I've noticed is that there is a real yearning for people to have a sense of community and a physical connection with one another. And that's one of the great losses that we've experienced through this shelter-in-place situation, where people are really noticing that they don't get to spend time, sharing a drink or celebrating or kind of communing with people. So I think with the last recession and through 9/11, we saw a significant uptick in the leisure market. People were not comfortable traveling overseas to destinations, so we started to see a lot of staycations where people were traveling locally to stay in hotels. We're anticipating a similar type of uptick, I think, as we start to crawl out of this. certainly, it's unknown through the end of the year. There's likely to be significant impacts on the group business side, but I think in leisure, we're still fairly positive and optimistic on that. So our projects are moving forward. I think the construction industry has done a very good job locally, at least being fairly nimble in responding to this crisis, and being able to maintain a certain, fairly high level of productivity. We saw probably a 30% dip in productivity through March and April, but that's starting to come back now. So our projects are coming back on track. We're a little bit off schedule, but all in all, I think we're still optimistic on our projects. To Steve's point, certainly there's going to be a lot of opportunities in the hospitality market moving forward. There's going to be winners and losers. There's a lot of leveraged hotels right now, and some of them aren't going to make it through this. So that will create significant opportunities in the market, I think, in the same way there will be within the retail space as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Todd. Looking at the backgrounds, we've got two of the three of you, Brett and Steve, you're clearly working in offices right now. I know before everyone jumped in the call, you both commented that you guys were in some ways operating a little bit as business as usual, given everything that's going on. Steve, how do you see you guys reopening your office? And you're in the middle of a move right now, so you've got a little bit more going on. But do you foresee what are your thoughts on how businesses will go about reopening and bringing people back into office space, given all the different regulations that are being talked about at a state level and here locally in San Diego as well?
Yeah, that is the $1 million question. How do you reopen? And and obviously each organization, different cultures, different size, different. You have multi-generational employees, and so each situation is going to be a little bit different. But the primary focus on all offices, all of kind of environments, business environments, is going to be focused on the health, safety, and well-being, to their employees. And if they're, public, if they're serving the public, they're going to obviously have to, address, meet the requirements for public engagement. I think the other couple key ingredients for a successful reopening is going to be providing, your employees the confidence that, your environment, whether, desk spacing is appropriate. As we were chatting a little bit before the call, the new kind of protocols for common areas, whether it be lobby capacity, whether it be elevator capacity, stairwell capacity, restroom utilization, you name it. There's the protocols are going to have to be well defined and well communicated, and given those kind of changes, people are going to need some time to adjust. So, if you have a larger office, there's probably going to be a phase in for those employees that really need the collaboration. Those collaborative teams will probably be the first to come in, and then those that are more adept or more comfortable or as productive working remotely, those will probably be your latter kind of folks to phase in. So it's for us it's relatively simple. We're a small office, and we're like I said earlier, we got a bunch of space, we got plenty of social distancing. It's a piece of cake. So we really, it's really been a non-event for us from an operations perspective. But I think we're the exception to what the vast majority of people are going to be dealing with.
Todd, moving over to you, you're probably a little bit on the opposite end. Lowe is a very large company. As a developer in the hospitality industry, you're meeting with a lot of different people, from designers to architects to construction folks. How are you and Lowe handling your office reopening?
Yeah, our corporate office remains closed. We're based in Brentwood. I think, to Steve's point, to a certain degree, many in our office environment and many within our culture, I think, have the ability to work remotely. We've always offered somewhat flexibility, especially on the project level. I think, a lot of guys within our company who are used to working remotely. They're either on the road, traveling between meeting with consultants, or they're running between various projects. For me, I spent 90% of my time traveling around between projects and meeting with consultants anyway. So for me, the challenge for me has been trying to overcome that and remain productive in this new environment. I think the real impact has been on the innovation side. I think it's hard to be creative and collaborate in this type of environment. And as developers, that's at the heart of what we do: innovation and creativity. And it's hard. And I mean, I think I don't do well in a vacuum. I like to be able to bounce ideas off people and have that iterative experience, that collaboration. And I think that's one of the things that's suffering right now, and it's likely to be one of the incentives to get some of these more creative teams back into the office space, and that'll be a challenge. How do we do that safely and still allow for that process to occur?
Thank you, Todd. Brett, you're obviously working from your office right now, but if you could give us a little bit more clarity on how some of your industrial tenants are actually handling their going back to work. I know there's a lot of conversations happening right now about the liability that landlords take on by letting businesses open back up within their space, and also how the tenants themselves are going about adjusting to the new normal that we're going to be entering into.
Right. Ben, one of the good things about industrial is typically the space that the operators have within the warehouses, it could be very well spread out. We have buildings that are upwards of 1 million square feet, and there may be 20 people working in the warehouse just running forklift equipment and loading. Our tenants, this is a big argument because they're saying they can't operate in the facilities, therefore we're not going to pay rent. But at the end of the day, we always want our tenants to operate safely. We want the health and well-being of our own employees to be the key and primary factor. But Ben, look, the legal rights to those properties we turn over to the tenants, and we have to let them run their own businesses. We're in here every day working in our office, and we've sent our employees home. We want them to be safe and healthy, but the partners are in here kind of like we're at war against this virus, and we're shouldered. And if we shoulder the rifle, we're going to get in here and keep the company afloat and keep things going so that everybody has a job to come back to. So we hope our tenants and our buildings have the same philosophy. So,
that's great. Thank you, Brett.
Yeah.
Todd, jumping over to you, I want to talk about what some of your thoughts are on how you foresee permanent changes in the market. You're obviously in the hospitality industry. We've chatted about that a little bit. In doing some research, I saw your name pop up in a BizNow article from back in February, I think, of 2018. And there's a lot of conversations then, as there's now, about the experience of hospitality. And before, people would call a hotel and say, I want to know about a local yoga class, and you'd walk into a hotel room and there'd be a yoga mat waiting for you. Some of these shared experiences that we've developed hospitality around are obviously under fire right now. So how do you foresee any permanent changes when it comes to the hospitality industry with what the world could look like after this is all over?
I mean, I think, you're going to see it a little bit in both hospitality and the office. I think the office market, some of the office projects I'm working on right now have responded to the hospitality industry in terms of how they are repositioning or positioning offices to be more like a hotel environment. The rival experience right through, to the office. Highly amenity-based spaces that are based on people interacting with one another. I personally don't see that changing over the long term. I think that there's going to be short-term and long-term impacts. The short-term impacts are the ones based on keeping people healthy, people feeling safe going back to work. I think once we have a vaccine and over the next year and a half, as people start to feel more comfortable and safe, you're going to see people coming back and really wanting to be in that environment where they're interacting with people in a lively, highly amenitized environment. I don't see that changing, whether it's in the office market or the hospitality. In fact, I see it becoming more in demand because people have just spent, the entire world has essentially spent, the last 2 months isolating from one another. And I think we've all realized how important community and interactions with one another, how important it is to our health and livelihoods and creativity. So I actually think that we're going to see a bolstering of some of those desires and some of those things into the future. I don't think that we're going to see a significant change over the long term.
I hope so. That'll be nice to get back and having drinks with people in a nice hotel lobby bar and catching up again. It's something I think we do all miss dearly, especially being in the commercial real estate industry and being a part of NAIOP. That's one of our kind of cornerstones for what we do with our networking and getting together. So it's great. Brett, switching over to the industrial side, there's been a lot of talk lately about a new American industrial policy coming out, less reliance on China, bringing more supply chains closer to home. How do you see that affecting your industrial portfolio and how you target new acquisitions?
Yeah, good question. We do feel that there is going to be a significant benefit to industrial in the United States as a result of what we're going through. I think there's probably 3 key trends which we're going to see. The first is I think the United States is done doing business with China. And I know there's a lot of U.S. entities that have invested enormous billions and billions of dollars of capital into China to set up plants and facilities and work with that government. But because we don't have treaties, we don't have tax treaties, we don't have a NAFTA or a USMCA that we have of Canada and Mexico, it has put a lot of that business operations at risk. And we've seen that even before the pandemic. We saw it with the tariff war, how disruptive that was to our system. So that primary issue is the disruption of the supply chain. And the one trend we see is corporate America is going to rebuild their inventories in this country. And instead of having these supply chains razor thin, kind of just in time, everybody's going to start storing more components, storing more products, more inventory to keep their businesses flowing, keeping retail shelves full, keeping food on the tables, diapers, all those things that go through our warehouses. So that component's a big one. I do think that Mexico will be a significant beneficiary of what we're seeing coming back from China, primarily because we have a treaty with them, we have a treaty with Canada, and I think that will be a major benefactor coming home. So that's my answer, Ben.
Thank you, Brett. That's great.
Yeah.
Steve, in the past and currently you're focused on a lot of mixed use projects, retail with office components, sometimes with some hotel components as well. What permanent changes do you see coming to the market and how you go about designing some projects?
Boy, I wish I knew that answer. I mean, the changes that we know of today versus the innovations that are going to take place, tomorrow, next year, so on and so forth. I think are going to be, really interesting. I think our new environment. I mean, the title for today was maskless. I think, on a go forward basis, the permanent changes can be touchless. And, whether it's, you're eating out, whether it's, going to a hotel, whatever you're doing, it's going to be, there are just going to be fewer touch points. And, which is, it's going to add to efficiency, productivity. I think AI and robotics are going to play a huge role in how our buildings are maintained, how our environments are maintained, just given the level of hygiene and consistent, to provide that safety that the public and the users of the space are going to be looking for. And so that's going to come into play on, how we operate buildings, how we operate environments, mixed use environments, and how we secure them. So I think that there's, in a lot of ways, it's going to be, a lot of the permanent changes are going to be very, very exciting, very, add to productivity, and, really provide in some cases, a higher level of service and efficiency in how, assets and the offerings that we provide to the marketplace.
Great, thank you so much. Brett, we're all young developing leaders on this call, at least most of us are. In the next 10 to 15 years, many of us will be sitting in the chairs that each of you are in, leading companies in senior positions. What lessons have you learned over the past 60 plus days in this downturn that you would be applying to the next downturn?
I mentioned a little bit before, the way we underwrite tenant credit is a big one right now, and making sure that we really dig into the fundamentals of the company and really understand their credits. Even the public companies that have investment, whether investment grade or not, or their debt's rated, that's a big one. We did talk about tenant default language in the lease. We would definitely take our time and look at some of those provisions and maybe rewrite some. Steve mentioned a comment about the amount of provisions that are going to come back through these leases, and I've seen some white papers from Alan Matkins already, and some of these big tenants are trying to put in pandemic language, and we're like already saying that's never going to make it in the lease. So that would be one. And the other one would be above standard improvements, making sure that we're not taking on an enormous amount of credit risk on above standard improvements relative to the balance sheet of the tenant. So those are some, but at the end of the day, guys, we'll have to look ourselves in the eyes, and we all learn this in business school, but this is truly a black swan event. It's very hard to ever plan for a black swan event, but what we do is we learn from them, and then going forward, we'll adapt to them. And I hope I don't see many more black swan events in my life. I'm getting too old, too much gray hair. Okay. Yeah.
That'd be nice if we could avoid all of them. I'm just not sure that's the reality. Steve, same question for you. What lessons have you learned so far? And if you're advising us young developing leaders and those of us who are in the industry now, what would you apply to the next downturn?
Well, it's a good question. And what are you going to apply to the next downturn? Because there will be multiple downturns through the balance of your careers. The good news is Todd, Brett, and I are still here after experiencing 3 or 4 or 5, in my case, downturns, and so they're not fatal. And as I mentioned earlier in today's discussion, they're great times to for opportunity. And they're yes, there's a fear component, but there's really it gives you a time to reflect. It gives you time to really look forward and figure out where the weak points are or where the opportunities are in the marketplace, and to hopefully be first to market, to execute. And the irony in this particular downturn is there's not a liquidity issue. There is plenty of money out there.
Yeah.
I mean, there's $6 trillion in some form or fashion that's being pumped into our economy. And so that gives me a lot of reason for hope. Now, what's the timing of, when do we start seeing the benefits of that capital, of that stimulus hitting the economy? I don't know. It could be 30 days, it could be 90 days, it could be next year. I don't know, but it will come. It will stimulate the economy. So I think that you got to be pragmatic. You got to plan for the worst. And I think the other thing that and Brett just kind of touched on it a little bit too, is with each downturn, you become smarter about how you develop your exit strategies, because all of our business plans, I can't think of one business plan in my 30 plus years of doing this that I've actually hit what the outcome was supposed to be in the business plan. I either exceeded it or I didn't. And, or maybe, but I never absolutely hit it. So, and I think that's what this has really taught me more so than most, is that we're in this situation because of modeling and incorrect data. And so it's a crisis, born, in my opinion, from, bad data, bad modeling, and bad policy. And as a result of that, how does that translate into how we model our business? How do we, create, multiple exit strategies and not be solely dependent on one or two primary exit strategies? That'd be kind of I think my key point of advice on planning for the next downturn.
Thank you. Todd, your thoughts?
Yeah, I echo both comments from Brett and Steve. I think, and Steve mentioned earlier, patience. I think one of the things that I've learned over, 25 years, going through, starting through the savings and loan, the end of the savings loan crisis, .com bubble, 9/11, the Great Recession, they've all been phenomenal learning experiences for me in my career. I've really taken a lot out of those experiences. And really, I think the key takeaways have been to focus on my relationships with the people I work with my colleagues, with lenders, whoever it may be, my consultants. Those key relationships and bring opportunities through times like this. I think having a good relationship with your lenders is critical right now. So I think understanding that and having a lot of trust and being able to be nimble through this process is important. During the Great Recession, I spent I was on an assignment doing a workout at Snowmass Base Village for Deutsche Bank, and everybody like, this is you're in Aspen, you're loving it, and it was painful. I mean, it was a painful experience, for all involved. But I learned an incredible amount. I was drinking through a fire hose, and all of these opportunities, while they're challenging at the time, as somebody coming up through their career, it really brings a phenomenal opportunity to learn and advance your career. And sometimes it takes you in a different direction. So I really encourage people to stay optimistic, be patient, focus on the relationships, and I think that there'll be a lot of positive to come out of this, over the next year.
Brett, kind of a follow-up to that question. If you were to sum up the advice you would provide to those of us who are part of that younger generation in the industry, this really is our first downturn for many of us. A lot of us came out of kind of towards the tail end of the Great Recession. We benefited from pretty good growth in the commercial real estate industry. Times have been good, and this is one that's, as you mentioned, the black swan event. Those are the ones you don't know about, but it's hit us pretty hard, and it's hit us quickly too. And I think a lot of us are looking back going, okay, how do we take our next steps? What does this look like for us? How do we survive this in some cases? How does my company survive this? So how would you sum up some advice for those of us who are facing some of these concerns and stresses?
Yeah, absolutely, Ben. So I broke this. I have two sides to this question. So my first is going to be the personal side. And I would encourage all the young people that are getting into this business, and really any side of the business, whether you're in equities or you're a bond trade or whatever, is to really adjust your lifestyle down. Don't, when times are good, and in my neighborhood, I can just sit on the patio of the restaurant and count the Ferraris going by on PCH. And I go, that's it. We're going into a recession. I can just see it coming just based on the hardware on the streets. Don't do it. Save your money. Live a simple life. Keep your house paid down. Drive a simple car, because these events come. And as Steve said it, they have come, and they'll be here in another 10 years, and it'll be in another form, another fashion. So really lower your lifestyle standards and live below your means. And I will tell you, you will take care of your families in the recession better. You'll take care of your health better in the recession. So that's my first thing, is make sure it's too late to plan for it because the recession's here, but next cycle, you can plan for it and be ready for it. Don't buy the big house and the big car and all the fancy stuff. This on the business side, what the landlords need, and guys in my position need, is they need great data. So I would encourage you to pick up the phone and make the personal phone call. Don't send a text. don't send. I get so many emails on COVID and Zoom and this. I just go through them, but I start deleting. The guys that pick up the phone, and there's a number of great brokers in San Diego that personally call me, and they call me with very pointed information that's valuable. I don't want to hear about the leases that were done, how much absorption is happening. I want to hear about a micro issue, about a user looking for this, and here's why they're looking for it. Brett, I think you ought to be considering this. And it's that personal call. And at the same time, when the brokers come up, like, guys like to come up and sit in the office. I mean, if guys want to come up and call me and they want to have a meeting and sit with Ed Roski and give them an update on San Diego, we'll take the meeting. We love guys that come up and make the FaceTime and make the effort and make sure the information is really relevant and pointed to what is going on in my space is industrial, but if it's office or retail for the other guys. So I really encourage that personal contact, and you'll build some relationships. By the way, Steve and I have been around long. I mean, Todd as well, but we remember the guys that were helping us in the recession, that were doing a few things for free, helping us with a couple of good data points, made the effort. I'll remember the guys that I owe favors to, and I always come back on my favors, always.
It's great advice. Thank you, Brett. Todd, you've been in a couple of different down cycles as an architect and as a developer now. What's your advice?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just reiterate what I already said. I think that for me, it's being patient and really continuing to foster the relationships that I have in place. It's reaching out to people, checking in to see how they're doing. It's the friendships with brokers or other people in the real estate development community. It's continuing to foster relationships with the mentors I've had. I've been blessed with having some very talented mentors over the years who continue to kind of foster that relationship with me and give me good advice. And whether that's Bob Lowe or Mike McNerney, there's guys who continue to invest their time in me. And for me, continuing to leverage those relationships and get insight from people is just so critical in times of duress. I think that this call is a prime example. I think wherever there's an opportunity for people like us that have been through a few cycles to be able to calm people's nerves and say, it's going to be okay. Here's what I've experienced, and I'm still here, and I'm still kicking. And in fact, it created a lot of opportunities for me. And that being able to look back sometimes is a good thing. I don't like to do it all the time because it makes me feel old, but I think sometimes I like to take the time to do that and reflect a bit. So getting insight from people that have been through it, I think, is just a really great tool.
Steve, by doing some quick math, depending on how an economist looks at it, you've probably spent maybe 3 to 5 years of your career in some sort of a recession or another. For those of us that are in this one right now, even a couple months, 6 months, a year, it can feel fatal. It can feel really tough when you're not able to do deals or checks stop flowing in. What's your advice to us younger folks and how we kind of mentally and positively think about coming out of this? And how have you survived to get to where you are at?
So the interesting thing about your question is I started my career in the early 80s in a recession. And, here I am 30 some odd years later, not that I'm ending my career, but certainly on the tail end of my career, going through something that, is beyond any of the other recessions that I've experienced. And I think, one of the things that, Todd was mentioning and is really important is, surround yourself with smart, positive people. And doesn't need to be real estate, and again, be mindful of what we do, within our industry. Everything that we do within real estate has a human component to it. So, our goal is to try and, create solutions that help as many people as possible. And so how do we do that? Well, we have to be, out and about in the community and, learning from as many people as possible. I think one of the beauties of this type, events is, quite honestly, you're the future. We're that kind of we've had our glory days, but you guys are all of you are the future, and your lenses are much different than certainly my lens. I won't speak for Todd or Brett, but I think it's really important that from NAIOP's leadership that, developing leaders such as yourself, all of you, should be far more engaged, because you have a much better sense as to, your generational needs and the generations behind you. So I think that there's a learning curve. That's certainly, where I am in my career, that, whether it's technology or other things that, quite honestly, I don't have an interest in, or I can't do as well as, people half my age. So I just, I think that it's really important that you continue to learn, surround yourself with, smart, bright people, positive, but also in different industries. So you're able to really understand what their needs are, how they use things, how they see things, and help to, and I think overall you end up creating a better overall solution. But again, the other thing, is, fear is a good motivator. The fear of failure is none of us like to fail. So, especially, and when times are tough, it makes you a whole lot more focused and deliberate in what you do and how you're going to do it. And so I think that that's, kind of a healthy adjustment, and then just be open to change, and whatever you do, don't do the same thing over and over. I mean, that's no fun, and it doesn't create, a good result long term.
Thank you, Steve. We've got a couple questions in from the audience, and I'll pick two of these out, and we'll get some thoughts from you all on them. Todd, question for you. What advice do you have for managing your teams and standing out as a leader right now?
Yeah, patience. Once again, I think everybody is experiencing this in a very unique way, everybody's got different situations at home that are making working from home more challenging for some and easier for others. So in my case, being very patient with people, understanding that we're all experiencing this in different ways. Some of us are fearful. Some of us are more impacted by it than others. And that level of understanding, I think compassion is a very important thing right now. And a little flexibility. Everybody is going through this right now, and I think being compassionate with one another is very, very important. Whether you think it's a big deal or not, I think being compassionate with the people that work for you is critical. Not everybody's got a good at-home work environment. Some people are renting and they've got a super stoner neighbor who is listening to Slayer and doing bong hits, and that's pretty hard to work around. So other people have screaming kids in the background. So I think that understanding that there's different environments that people are dealing with right now is really important. So I think compassion ultimately is I think an important leadership quality right now.
That's fantastic advice. Thank you, Todd. Brett and Steve, will finish up with one final question. We'll throw it towards both of you. Brett, if you could kind of lead us off with your answer. How should someone who doesn't have a lot of experience yet in the commercial real estate industry position themselves well to come out of this downturn?
Ben, we talked a little bit about that when we first got on the call before everybody joined. And I think that Steve gave a great answer a few minutes ago, is to surround yourself with really smart people. And as I told my boys growing up, I tell the young partners in here, it's a lot easier in life to learn from somebody else's mistake than you make it yourself. And so with that, find a leader in the industry in the skill that you want to learn and go embrace that leader, some form of mentor, some sort of organization that can help you learn and grow. But I definitely would take the time to find the best there is in the industry and learn from that person or that individual, that company. And there's a lot of companies, by the way, that you can be a part of that have a structure and have an infrastructure. Either it's an analyst role at a JLL or an old HFF or an eStale, and you grow through the analyst. So many different ways you can learn in this business. And, you know, I think it's good to learn from smart people. So.
Thank you for the wonderful plug for NAIOP and our Developing Leaders program. That's perfect.
You got it. You got it.
Steve, hopping over to you.
Sure. You know, not much to add to that, other than I would say that one of the great things about technology is there are so many sources of information. And so you can basically, you know, there's white papers, you know, there's all sorts of things you can research. So, you know, if you're just starting out, I always found helpful, and I still do to this day, to read as many different, you know, things as you can about, you know, industry specific, but also, again, you know, non-industry specific. And because, again, whether it's residential, whether it's commercial, office, industrial, hospitality, there's so much to learn about each and every, you know, different product type, that to become truly an expert, you have to be well versed in a multitude of different, you know, product types. And so, you know, your learning is never going to stop, which is one of the fun things about what we do. But you know, if you're young and getting started, one of the best things you can do is, number one, I think is Brett talked about it earlier, pick up the phone and ask for a meeting. And more than likely, anyone will take that call, answer that email, and meet that person either on the phone or, you know, 6 feet apart somewhere, and have a discussion and answer those questions. And I think, you know, now is an exceptionally great time to capitalize on everyone's, you know, all of us have a little bit more free time. And so, you know, avail yourself to that. You know, take the first step and call that person who you want to meet with, what you want to learn from them. And in turn, that person that you're meeting with will learn from you, because again, the generational differences, the interest difference, and the lens difference. So reading, researching, and communication, personal communication with as many different people as possible will help accelerate your professional career.
Thank you so much, Steve. Well, Brett, Todd, and Steve, thank you so much for your time today and joining us during this. It's been a great hour or so. We really appreciate all the candid advice and feedback and your thoughts on this very unique cycle and point of our lives that we're going through. NAIOP is going to continue to provide value through these webinars that we're holding. The developing leaders, we highly encourage you to look on the NAIOP national website. A lot of the free courses they are providing that can help you brush up and sharpen your skills. As all of our panelists have mentioned, education is a great way to position ourselves well for coming out of this downside. So thank you all. I appreciate your time this afternoon and looking forward to seeing you all in the next webinar.
Yeah. Thank you, Ben. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
See you.